and they have not, they are not representing the views of my employer, just in case. So the first thing that I would love to call out, maybe, or to bring to our consciousness is the notion that the wisdom, the courage, the leadership traits are actually within us all. We just have forgotten. And what I hope to do when I engage with people in organizations is to help them remember. So I wanted to ask you, ladies, what do you think of when you think of beliefs, taboos, biases, assumptions, and these notions that we've been holding to throughout history? Anything that comes to mind, anyone wanting to share?
Do you want folks to speak up or put it in the chat?
Oh, speak up, please. Thank you. I'm not a super big friend of the chat.
Okay.
Distracts me.
All right. So who wants to go first?
I can go first. I think from beliefs and taboos or even biases would be, especially in the context of leadership, is that men, or from a gender perspective, men are more capable of leading, right? From all in all dimensions. I think that's something that we have held very strongly through the history. I would say it's no different today.
Yes, that's
and I
a
would be
very good
surprised if
example.
it stays on for the next few centuries. But that's a very strong one.
Really good example, Padmini. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. That's kind of why Leah exists, right? But I think there's also the sense of leadership as a very personality-driven thing. We hear leaders being charismatic, about appealing, and I think we sometimes look at the external reflection of a leader as a measure of their ability rather than the impact they have on those being led. And the idea of leadership is something about first impressions and power and charisma. That just needs to die, because leadership isn't about that. It's about something far more fundamental about how do you get the best from people.
Awesome. Thank you, Leila. So from that perspective, leadership would be something that is usually a male-driven or male-dominated role. It seems to be a role, by the way. It's also something that is expressed externally or in terms of appearances. Any other thoughts? Any other examples of taboos or beliefs or even biases?
Yeah. Something else that I think it's very common for people to think is that some people are leaders and some people are not leaders, and they will never be able to be leaders as well.
Yeah, perfect, Dani. Yeah, this idea that in organizations, some people are the thinkers and some other people are the doers, and it seems to be something that is somehow established.
I agree with both of you. Just noticing one of my clients in New York, they were doing orientation for new set of employees. And in that group of 40 people, it was fairly obvious to the observers who were the future leaders. Because that instant, oh, you're going to be a future leader, you're not. That's done very early, and that's full of biases.
Yeah, so we start somehow preparing ourselves and actually creating a consciousness in our organizations of who are those people that have been chosen somehow or positioned to take on those roles. So I wanted to probably share a couple of other examples that are not necessarily related to leadership, but that have a lot to do with how we think in organizations. One of them is a very intrinsically established belief that the world has to be looked at from a mechanistic viewpoint. So we break down and we think that we need to look at what's happening around us sequentially and also in finite pieces. So we believe that the total is equaling the sum of the parts. And even though this may sound like a little bit disconnected from organizational life, in reality, when you look at it, it actually drives most of the behaviors that we see in organizations. Even that separation of power, where some people have to hold the power, some others have to do the work. So the hierarchical nature of the organization is based in this mechanistic perspective that the world is just a collection of parts. Carrots and sticks is another belief. It's not even demonstrated. Actually, it's been demonstrated at this point that operant conditioning, which is the underlying behavioral system that is applied when we think of punishment and rewards, is based on incorrect assumptions about the ability for a human being to be intrinsically motivated. So even that belief that we have to incentivize people externally is not necessarily right. We can evolve that idea. Actually, we are doing it already. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think that we need to talk about adaptive leadership or adaptability in leadership and in organizations?
Okay, so jumping in to start the conversation, I would say it's adaptive because everything is changing these days. What we all know objectively is something called the rate of change. Things have changed more in the last 20 years than the previous 100 years. And it's everywhere. It's technology, it's how fast technology is adopted, it's culture, it's geographical. And it's also just looking at financial number of companies that were in the top companies. This keeps changing. A company was the top for 100 years. Now it's more like 10 years, all of those. And in this new environment, change and adaptability is absolute requirement.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Leila. And it's also when we start looking at the organization as a system, that we need to start to comprehend, understand, and deeply understand actually the notions of adaptability. Because when we allow ourselves to detach from that idea that things are linear and that events are linear and that impacts of our decisions are linear, and instead we start to think of the multilinearity and the circularity of everything around us, then we need to start to explore the notion of adaptability. Adaptability is a characteristic of complex adaptive systems, which are systems that are able to engage with their environment to an extent that they can thrive and they can succeed in continuing to grow. So that's where the notion of adaptability comes from. And it has to do with what you said, Leila. It's about actually being able to be highly responding to the changing environment so that we can basically continue to thrive. And when I was thinking about this introduction to the topic of adaptability, I thought, well, I can talk about my last 15 years with agility and, my experiences in organizations from that perspective of adopting agile, hence thinking about systems and thinking about adaptability. But in reality, I thought, hold on a minute, this has been actually something that has been going on for me in my interactions with organizations forever. So this is the point I'm trying to make is adaptability and thinking of the organization as a complex adaptive system are beyond agile. Agile is just a means to enable some of those patterns and structures that are necessary for an organization to be adaptive. But there are also other ways of achieving that. And I wanted to make this distinction because, more and more we hear that agile becomes the end to, any organizational transformation, and that shouldn't be the case. I mean, if you think that the tool or that the approach becomes the end goal, then you are missing the point around adaptability. So what do you think is required in order to become more adaptive? And if you think about yourself, what does it mean for you to be adaptive, to respond to the changes that life presents, to be open to shifting? What does that mean? What are you shifting? What does that openness mean?
I would say be more open to, be authentic, be more open to failures, because in the past leadership was all about successful. Oh, this person is successful. There was always a success connotation to somebody being a leader, but now it's also about being transparent about your failures and failing fast, learning fast. So I think those are the themes that are coming to my mind. Does
Beautiful.
anybody? Yeah.
Anybody has any other views?
This is Meenakshi. I think it's also about learning. Leadership is usually, leaders are expected to know everything. And that's one measure that's been used to call someone a leader or not. And I think that what's emerging is, and which is all in ancient wisdom as well. So this is not really new, but I totally agree with Sofia when you said, when you started by saying that we've forgotten. So I think that the concept of learning, for one, is that if you're a leader, doesn't mean you have to stop learning. That's one. And two, if you're a leader, doesn't mean you have to know all the answers. How well are you able to create an environment where others are able to learn and grow, and you don't have to be the know-it-all?
Wonderful. Thank you, Meenakshi. Actually, and where you are able to learn and grow.
Yep.
So thank you, because that was a beautiful path to actually bring you to the next topic that has everything to do with what you just said, including the fact that this is ancient wisdom. So it's the matter of complexity. So the question of what happens when we limit our potential and our capacity in organizations to just the leader to do the thinking, the leader to make the decisions, the leader to know better, the leader to have the knowledge and the answers. What happens is we have the problems that we have simply because of the fact that the level of complexity in the not just in the world around us, but also in the within the context of the organization is such that there's no single individual, no matter how much experience, no matter how much technical expertise, no matter how senior they are, that person is not going to be able to resolve for the problems with the same ability to find the most proper solution than a group of people, even if the group of people doesn't have a single expert in the topic. So this is now, really purely systems perspective thinking. It's been demonstrated in research, and especially research around juries and the impact of a jury in a trial versus the judge being on their own. What's been demonstrated is that the collective of a jury has always come up with a better outcome than the judge on their own, even when the judge was an expert in the field. So what this is pointing at is something that has also been demonstrated with energy reading tools. Sorry, because I don't know the actual technical name for the tool, but they've shown that when a group of people come together in a room and they have a conversation, and depending on where that conversation is going and how the energy is flowing in the room, it's been visualized that there is an arc of energy that actually develops above the people in that room. So this is pointing to the idea that we actually develop a collective intelligence. I wanted to touch on the idea of complexity from a slightly different angle. If you look at this map, this is an image from the Earth Observatory in NASA that is showing how China shifted the air, the pollution in the air in just a week or two when they needed to stop, functioning because they were in lockdown. So the point is that when we look at a system, at a complex adaptive system, what we learn to see or to look for are the multiple consequences of the changes or the impacts that we introduce in that system. So this is a really nice way of explaining it. So Jeffrey Shaman, a climate researcher, said with climate change, it's not just the climate system that changes. It affects human health, food security, agricultural security, political and economic stability, and governance. So it has all these ripple effects that affect all the components of society in a very slow way that may be hard to quantify at times. Coronavirus is more immediate, but it's doing the same thing. It has completely disrupted our society in a way that we haven't seen since the Second World War. And of course, I'm sure that you ladies have a lot of experience on this, right? And similar here in Australia, we had a massive fundamental impact in most of our systems because of COVID. Sorry, I'm trying to see your faces for a sec, but I'm surely not handling the technology well. Any thoughts about this idea that a system has multiple interdependent impacts? So when something changes, we are even incapable of seeing what those impacts are, the impacts of our changes. Any thoughts about that?
You mentioned COVID earlier, Sophia, and one easy thing is we took for granted global trade. Supply chain disruption has remade industries and cost people jobs, and there's so many things. This is what system thinking does. We take for granted that we can just do our own thing and everything else is going to happen. But system thinking says when one thing changes, everything else will feel the impact of it. And there are pros and cons to this, but at least we're starting to see that we cannot be islands. The impact of other people's actions on us and our impact on other people, we're at least having the conversations right now, and organizations are not immune from this. When we talk about business, we sometimes forget business is a microcosm of society, and everything that's happening in society, you're going to see it and feel it in the business world too.
Absolutely. And yeah, I would say that businesses are an intrinsic, fundamental aspect of how the world works today. And so if we want to change how the world works, maybe we need to start by looking at what businesses are doing and how they are doing it, and take a stance of a much more social and responsible place in society than they have today. Or, of course, we can also, accept the consequences of how we are operating as humans, which is what happens anyways. I mean, we may want to stop it, but it won't just stop. We need to shift our paradigms and our belief systems if we want to change the reality or the way that we perceive reality. Are you still seeing my
Yes.
screen share, ladies?
Yes, we can see, but it's not in the presentation mode, just so that you know.
Yeah, okay. Because for some reason I'm unable to bring you back to seeing you.
Do you want to stop sharing and share again?
Yes, we'll do that. Let's see. never allow technology to take control of my life. Can you see that now?
Yes, it's in presentation mode. Yes, this is perfect.
Thank you. So the idea of complexity has also to do with our own ability to engage with the world and to understand systems as humans, as individuals. And there is very interesting research by this organization, Lectical, that has been looking at leadership for the last 25 years or so. And what they found is that as you grow in your level of seniority, so as you take on higher ranks in organizations, the gap between your ability to make the most proper decisions and make your part of the organization successful, if you wish, decreases as you are higher in that level of seniority. So the lower your rank, the better your decisions, basically, as a leader. Does anyone have any ideas of why this might be the case? If this research is pointing us to a fact, which we never know. What could be one reason why a supervisor is more capable of making a good enough decision than a senior executive?
They're closer to the reality.
Yes.
I was
Yes.
gonna jump in also. Sorry about that. Sorry.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead. Go ahead. I just had that much to say.
You know what? I think we're both on the same track. I was actually going to say the same thing. I feel as though the supervisors are much closer to their team that they're actually working with, as opposed to someone in senior management, which is they're further away from the actual team that's actually working or doing the work.
Absolutely.
I think it's
Yep.
something else. I think it's that senior management is making decisions at a higher level, at a more complex level, where there's a lot more uncertainty. And it is true that they're further from the individuals that are going to carry out the decision. But I think there's so many more moving parts at a higher level when you're making a strategic decision than when you're making a tactical decision. And
that's absolutely right. Sheila, sorry, go on.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So there is the intrinsic higher level of complexity and higher levels of the organization. There is the idea that people are more removed from where information is being created. There's also a timeliness aspect to it, whereby waiting for a senior manager to make a decision is actually usually, a late decision. So, feedback and decisions have to be made on the field. So these are some of the reasons why this is happening. There's also the idea that managers in organizations, even today, continue to make decisions in isolation from the multiplicity of perspectives that are required in order to understand the complex system. So there is a tendency to think functionally. There's a tendency to not to explore the perspectives of the people affected by the potential change or the potential decision. So all these are reasons why there is a growing gap between how we strategize in organizations versus how things actually happen. There is also another aspect of this issue, which is it has to do with the individual's ability to understand complexity. And this is a phrase from a book by Robert Keegan and Lisa Lahey that have been researching adult development for the last 40 years. This is one of the various books that they wrote in over our heads. What they said is, when we experience the world as too complex, we're not just experiencing the complexity of the world, we're experiencing a mismatch between the world's complexity and our own at this moment. There are only two logical ways to mend this mismatch: reduce the world's complexity or increase our own. And so which path do you think we've been taking so far? Have we been, yeah?
Sorry, I was pointing out the obvious and say, since most of us can't reduce the world's complexity, we better start working on increasing our own.
But I
Yes,
have a question
and
about that.
yeah.
Say that the world is increasing in complexity. Is it that because we start from a point where we understand a certain level of complexity and new things come along and people get lazy and don't learn the new things? But for someone that's all they've ever experienced, that's the level of complexity they start with. So I wonder if that's part of it, that we each have a different perception of what complexity is.
Yes, there is a lot of that, Sheila. So there is, on one side, there is my own perspective of the world and my own ability to understand what's going on around me. There's also the fact that the speed of especially technological change is accelerating, and the speed of implosion of the current system, or of many of the current systems in the world, is also accelerating. So that's a reality, because when a system operates from a place of a closed system, there is a process called entropy that grows over time until a point where the system cannot hold itself anymore. And this is something that is happening in the world in many aspects of the world systems. So we are observing that. So there is a real acceleration to the complexity, the issues, the problems that we're facing. But there's also this realization and this evolution that we are going through as humans that is happening, whereby more and more people are actually awakening to the fact that we have to look at the reality around us from a different perspective. So that's the mismatch that Keegan and Lahi are talking about here. We need to continue to expand and evolve our individual ability to make sense of the world around us, so that we can better understand these multiple interdependencies around us. And the whole point is to think of systems. Really, if I had to leave you with the one thing that all these years of exploring organizations and working with, power-based systems, etc., have left me with up until this day, that is the notion that we need to understand systems and the way in which we engage with the systems of life around us. And I'm not just talking about the system of your organization, I'm talking about the human systems within your organizations, the technological structural systems, the cultural systems, the world beyond your organization, etc. So the idea is that when you start thinking of your organization as a system, you start shifting your own beliefs and your own perspectives and your own understanding of how you engage with that organization. For example, given the level of complexity of our organizations and the world, what we need to learn is to synthesize information and to help our organizations to mobilize by approximation to a better place than they are today. So this is a very different notion from, hey, I'm going to teach people A, or I'm going to coach them to develop behavior B, and that's it. And then we are all agile and we're all adaptive. No, that actually doesn't work. That actually only messes up even more with the system. So instead, we need to understand what would be better possibilities and what would be a horizon towards which we want to see this system moving. and what are interventions that we can introduce in the system in order to start mobilizing it. And by the way, never expect that things will end up in the way that you want them, because there are certain characteristics of complex adaptive systems, for example, emergence, whereby you cannot even design a complex system and you cannot control it. So, which takes us to another aspect of this topic, or this notion of leadership within complex adaptive organizations, which has to do with the fact that here we're not talking about technical problems, because technical problems are the examples that you were sharing at the very beginning when you were saying, well, you know, there is an expectation that a leader has to know everything, and that they stop learning because now that they are leaders, then they know everything, right? So what's the point, etc. The idea that we will solve this issue of adaptability from that technical stance is actually missing the most fundamental aspect of this perspective, which is we need to work to develop our capacity to work with adaptive problems. So the adaptive challenge or the adaptive problem, for example, you know, COVID disrupting all our, you know, value chains or our markets or our economies, demands that we need to grow, culture issues, restructures, pandemics, etc. All these things are triggering an aspect of a problem that we cannot resolve just by applying our previous experience, our technical skill. And that's where, you know, this leader can know a lot and they may still really miss the point. So what we are looking for when we talk about adaptive challenges is that we as individuals and organizationally go to the depth of shifting our mentality, our behaviors, how we think about the world around us, our assumptions, the values, loyalties, attitudes, competencies, and habits that we have been applying so far. All these things we have to question and take to a completely different place from where they are today. So how do we do this? One is we shift our organizations to become deliberately learning organizations. By the way, that's another book by Kihan and Lahi. But these concepts that I'm talking about now are actually reflected by a great number of researchers, not just them. I'm going to share some bibliography at the end if you're interested. There has been an emergence of these notions in the scientific organizational world. And that's, I think, the most fascinating aspect for me with regards to adaptive leadership. It's the fact that in many different places from various different sources, they reach to similar conclusions. That is what we describe as emergence. So I put here two very different sources so that you see how the statements actually overlap. Tyson Yunkaporta is an Aboriginal Australian. He wrote an amazing book called Sun Talk, where he exposes the thinking of indigenous knowledge. And through that perspective, he explains the problems that we're facing in the world. And then Peter Senge, The Fifth Discipline, is a relatively old book, but he was the one that described the learning organization. So Tyson said, the real understanding of systems is in seeing the spaces in between, the relational forces that connect and move the elements of a system. This is where the patterns outside of linearity exist. And before I read the other one, I would love to hear from you, ladies. Is there anything that rings a bell in this statement? What comes to your mind?
I was just putting in the chat window, the Fifth Discipline, one of my favorite books. I read it before I got into Agile, and it really talks about why Agile practices and why Agile mindset, even though it doesn't use the word, are needed to solve any organizational challenges. The challenges facing most organizations today are too complex to be solved by one or few people with the right answers. we all have to step in and share our knowledge. It's a thing within Leo what we call everybody knows something no one else knows. So when you put that together, you get a better picture. And that reality check is important for organizations.
Yep. And so where do we find that knowledge? Where is that?
Well, my background is in lean.
Say it again.
Sorry, Sophia. My background is in lean, so I would say the answers are with those doing the work. So there's a thing called iceberg of ignorance that says lean see 4% of the problems. This is from a survey in 1990. It's still true. And lean talks about Gemba walks and all of those things. The people who know the problems and know best how to fix it are those doing the work. So they need to be in the decision-making loop.
Absolutely, that's true. And there is an and there, which is the connection between those people. So in reality, the knowledge that the system grows resides in the relationships. It is in the relationships with each other that we grow knowledge. I can hold knowledge in my brain, in my perspective. Unless I share that knowledge with someone around me, then that knowledge actually doesn't even exist, or is basically useless for my system in any case. So I wanted to point to that particular message in that statement by Tyson. It's in seeing the spaces in between. What he's referring to is to the connections and the relationships between people. And we will come back to this topic a little bit later. What Peter Senge said is organizations where people continually expand their capacity to create the results they truly desire, where new and expansive patterns of thinking are nurtured, where collective aspiration is set free, and where people are continually learning to see the whole together. So these are really important notions that if we hold knowledge for ourselves, then we're not feeding the system, and the system is not learning and growing. We need to think of the system. Senji also talked about 5 learning disciplines, and I mentioned them here because I'm going to touch on this later on. Personal mastery, mental models, shared vision, team learning, and systems thinking. Did anyone read the 5th discipline, by the way? It's a very thick book.
Yeah, 20 years ago.
But it is still, it makes my top 20 books.
You did say, Lila, sorry. Yeah, you did say that you read it before you started Lean. Yeah, I actually haven't finished it. It just killed my brain, but I'm browsing, like, I go to the book and I look for specific things. So the idea is that in a complex adaptive system, so network structures are complex adaptive systems. And if you think of agility, when we design cross-functional teams and when we design all the different versions of scaling and descaling agile and all, whichever, even the most argued frameworks, agile frameworks, or they all are somehow, or most of them, trying to come up with some version of this structure, which is the network, interdependent network of teams and subsystems. The idea is that when you look at a complex adaptive system, there is no global plan or leader or control mechanism, and you can think of the many examples in nature. It's many, not all of the natural systems that follow a design of a complex adaptive system. A forest is one example. There's no pacemaker in a forest. There's no leader, no older tree that establishes the pace for us to, for the other trees to follow the seasons. The seasons themselves are not establishing a pace per se. They are just changing the conditions in the environment. And the forest actually thrives when it is successful in adapting to that environment. If you think of a beehive, there was an old belief that has been debunked, which indicated which suggested that the beehive had the queen bee, and the queen bee was the one that was ordering, bossing everybody around, and that's been demonstrated to not to be the case. The bees simply have different functions or different roles in the system. Yeah, the forest is beautiful. And so the idea is that if we want to understand the complex adaptive system, we need to pay attention to the relationships and the forces that connect those agents. So the people doing the work are the agents, and we need to look at what's happening. So when I was suggesting that we have to follow the path that the system is taking, what we are looking at is understanding those connections, even that energy. So with the example of the energy that we can effectively see in a room as it develops, that energy is the thing that we need to follow in a system. So if you follow the energy, you will follow the attention. You will see where our attention is going. The agents in a system are driven by three principles: coherence, separation, and alignment. And if you read Santok, the Indigenous Knowledge book, you will see how beautifully that's explained in the context of the most agent culture in the world. So they have these three aspects in place. Coherence means we need to design our complex adaptive system in a way that we don't have contradictions in the system. And I'll give you one example from the organizational setting. When we design an organization to adopt agile teams, an agile teams structure, and we say, okay, so now we want everybody to collaborate, and that's why we put them in cross-functional teams, because we know that the one single person is not going to be able to solve for the whole problem, which means we need to have all the multiple skill sets required in order to resolve the problem. That's what the cross-functional team is there for. But then we also maintain our same old system of performance review and praise and recognition and punishment. And so we are asking people to collaborate, but we're also measuring them for how much they demonstrate an individualistic behavior. So that's a lack of coherence in a system. We are overlapping two opposing patterns or structures that will drive opposing behaviors. And so what happens with people is that people actually feel sick about it. It's as simple as that. When you go to your workplace and you feel a sort of pain in the chest, and you are there and you don't know what it is, but you feel something wrong inside you. Has anyone ever had that sense? As in, oh, I don't know what this is, but something is wrong here and I just cannot pinpoint it. I cannot describe it.
Like a trigger.
Yeah. Even, something that you are almost, it's an intuitive thing that happens to you. That happens when you encounter a lack of coherence between your own personal values and the stated or the exposed values in the organization, or the behaviors or the expectations. So that's lack of coherence in you and your relationship with that system. Coherence is actually an attribute of a complex adaptive system. Separation means we are all unique, and we need to truly, fundamentally, deeply understand that diversity of thought. And it's not about diversity of skin color or language as much as it is diversity of thought. Accepting that we think uniquely differently is the key aspect that the leadership needs to work with. And we stay sort of shallow in that idea that diversity is all about gender diversity or, nationality. We need to go much deeper than that. And we need to understand that it's only in accepting the fact that we are all based, each one of us has developed their own understanding of the world based in their own absolutely unique experiences, belief systems, indoctrination, education, etc. It's only when we understand that we can truly accept diversity of thought. It's called cognitive diversity. That's different from the more shallow diversity that we talk about when we put these sort of diversity plans in place, etc. So, and the last one is about alignment, and we do know alignment from our agile context, but this is a fundamentally important aspect of complex adaptive systems. Unless we are strongly fundamentally helping people to align, we actually won't be able to have a system that can coherently move towards one shared horizon. I'm probably talking too much already, and I'm probably over time. Padma,
No, I was just about typing that you have about 7 more minutes, and then we can open it up to questions.
Awesome. So a couple more ideas around what we have to do as leaders, or how we can help leaders develop their ability to become more adaptive, and to enable adaptability in their organizations. Distribute power, painful, you know. Remember, we're shifting from the hierarchy, the triangle, to a network, this type of design, which means power has to be distributed across all those little points there. Unless we do that, then we're not going to be able to get to the bottom of shifting the system. So distributing power also means distributing decision-making. And this is not about empowering. Again, another shallow idea. Empowering is still holding deep down in the belief of empowerment, still remains the notion that as a leader, I still have the last word. I'm being kind, I'm being generous, and I'm allowing you to use a little bit of my power, and that's how I'm empowering you. We need to go much deeper than that, and we need to effectively distribute power, truly, finally, forever. Like a leader in a position of power should not be put in that position of power. That's very simple. We need to enable autonomy, emergence, and complexity. We have a tendency, when I was asking you all that idea around how you understand complexity in the world, and what do we do as humans? What we do naturally is we reduce complexity, we oversimplify, we eliminate information. That's why science is mechanistic. It's because it's easier to just, cut the little slices and look at that tiny bit there. I don't worry about on the multiple fundamental impacts that my observation will have. I'm having a massive effect on the system by observing just that little piece. So we need to stop doing that, and we need to instead develop our own sense-making capacity, which helps our brain be able to interpret more complexity. And then the last thing we need to do in order to enable that level of agency, and how the agents need to hold those 3 patterns of coherence, separation, and alignment, we need to focus the system to develop growth mindset, mastery, and purpose, so that the organization can truly become a learning organization, because it's in its nature to try and learn and understand the environment around it. How do we do this? It's a trip to the depths of your own self. So it's all about how you engage in this process as a leader, and as a person that is not necessarily holding a position of leadership. So yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, I want to change myself. I'm not going to cover all of this, but basically these are the behaviors or the characteristics that we want to see developing in adaptive leaders. We want to see them being driven by principles and values, because they understand that they cannot effectively determine, A, B, C, and D, and this is how I will operate. Instead, we give them the container of those principles. And, we relate to the Agile principles in this. The reason why Agile works so well, when we make it work well, is because of the fact that it defines a system of behaviors, providing clarity. So establishing that North Star, as we call it in Lean, or, defining the purpose, the organization, the purposeful organization is a whole concept where we are also helping people anchor behind understanding that horizon that we want to move towards, enabling autonomy, growing themselves, coaching others, being driven by an egalitarian perspective, and being able to see the system. So, and just probably to finish, touching on the systemic perspective, the thing about understanding the organization as a complex adaptive system is that we need to understand the circular nature of the world that we live in. We need to understand that there are lots of systems operating that we are even unaware of. For example, emergence being one of them, which is an obvious one, but we don't necessarily pay attention to it. So the idea that we can design a system, control a system, and expect that it will behave in the ways that we want it is an absolute fallacy. Having awareness of how structure defines the functions in that system. So basically, if you want to change people's behaviors, you don't go and tell them, hey, you need to behave in this other way. You actually need to change the system around them, and people actually will settle in a different set of behaviors over time. There are consequences to our actions. So when I touch the system over there, there is a plethora of unintended consequences all over the place, which is one reason why cross-functionality works so well. We want to listen from as many people as possible. Another reason why a jury works so well. We want to have all those multiple perspectives. The stupid questions are the best questions. And then shifting the way in which we observe our organization from looking at events or data, you know, or someone said something, to actually understanding patterns of behavior over time and the structures that are affecting those patterns over time. And I think I'm running out of time basically, but you know, there's a bit more to it, like especially the work that you need to do internally with yourself, how you need to challenge your own belief system. You need to go deep down to the source of how you see the world if you want to enable a different type of organization. Is anyone a leader here? A leader as in have people reporting to them in this group?
Admini, I can only think of you. Is my voice coming through okay? I'm
Yeah, it's
hearing
pretty
like
clear.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. You know, Sofia, that also tells me that we have to have one more session on this to cover everything else that you had in mind. But it is, you know, we have 15 more minutes, and in the interest of time, I would like to open it up for questions.
Absolutely.
So yeah, this was so powerful. I mean, like I've had so many aha moments. I would request the audience to turn on their videos, and you know, we'll open it up to questions.
Can you take control, Padma, by the way, because I cannot stop sharing.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you.
So let me try sharing something, and then that way it'll.
It's only allowing me to share, and you share. Any questions, ladies? Any thoughts? Maybe Padmini, if you have people reporting to you, do you have any experience or anything that you would like to share in terms of your own process of you know, exploring your leadership?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that, Sofia. You know, I think I've been constantly reinventing myself as a lead, and it's not easy. You know, I have about maybe 13, 14 Scrum Masters now reporting to me, and as much as we talk about leadership and how leaders should be and what we expect from leadership, when you really step into their shoes, I think it is a two-way street, and it takes a lot to be a good leader every single day, every single minute. Right? That's my learning. That's in summary, because you manage not just diverse personalities, diverse thought processes, right? And you have to be correct for everyone. which is hard, right? What works for one does not necessarily work for the next. So how do you find that common denominator which works across everyone? So you're always a little bit suboptimal in the way you talk, or in the way you roll out things, or in the way you implement. So I have long given up on the notion of perfect leadership, great leadership, right? I think that role is fulfilled by a human being with limitations. So I think we have to account for that constantly, right? As somebody who's following a leader, and as a leader who is leading everyone. But having said that, I think every moment is a learning moment for me personally, because everybody that I worked with, I have never treated them as somebody who is working for me. Padma, you were on my team
Yes.
for the time, right? And I'm definitely not one of those leaders who thinks I know it all, right? Because everybody brings brilliance along with them, and they have something very unique to offer. And that's a learning point for me. So I truly believe leadership is a very collaborative quality, right? And as you said rightly, Sophia, and Leila was mentioning, it's not know-it-all kind of a role at all, right? We are constantly learning. So it's an interesting space, to say the least. And if you don't adapt, you become obsolete.
Thank you, Padmini. That was awesome, and it's probably those things that you mentioned more than anything else. It's about learning. It's about having the humility to understand that no one can know everything, and it wouldn't even make sense to have that expectation. And being super self-compassionate about the fact that you won't get it always right, or for some people you might not be the person that is enabling them as they would expect. So just keep going, and keep doing your best every day, and that's the best that we can all do. Any other thoughts or questions or comments?
Following on both you and Padmini, I'm wondering then, one, are we asking too much from leaders? And if so, is the answer to distribute the power of leadership more equitably so that no one person has the burden?
Oh yes, that's the whole idea. Absolutely. For as long as we continue having these positions that are formally established in organizations, the organization will continue to be hierarchical. So that's exactly the idea, that we actually stop placing that responsibility in the one person. There is actually no real benefit in doing that, and it's actually more damaging than beneficial in most cases. So the idea of the adaptive network, the networked organization, is that leadership is distributed.
So the conversation really needs to shift to, there might be initial cost in changing our leadership structures, but we're paying a huge price now that's mostly invisible. So let's talk more transparently about the current costs, and is it worth taking a bit of short-term pain for the long-term gain?
Yeah. There is all the second part of this talk, which has to do with how you need to show up personally in order to achieve some of that. Because when we start exploring why is it that we have these structures in place, what we learn is that we need these hierarchies because of our human nature. We are trying to solve for our fears, our need to belong, our socializing mindsets, etc. That's what we're doing actually, and we reflect that in the way that we structure our organizational systems. So in order to undo some of that, we need to start with ourselves. We need to start undoing some of our own beliefs, which is why I started, with that question about the beliefs that are driving the way of seeing the world today.
That is so true.
Sofia, quick question. You mentioned that no one can really work on the system, but also you mentioned that by doing little tweaks to the system and then see what happens, then you can help the behaviors. So how is it then that, like, what is that you design, or how do you suggest that that process of designing the system runs?
Well, in reality, you know, from the perspective of organizational design, we still call it organizational design, and we can, you know, sometimes depending on the work I'm doing, I call myself an adaptive organizations designer. But the point, in reality, we are not truly designing the system. What we're designing are interventions or certain changes that we want to introduce in the organization that we hopefully do as experiments that will nudge or mobilize. They will just trigger something different in the organization, and then you need to embrace and see what happens. You need to brace yourself and see what happens. You cannot predict what the outcome will be, and also you cannot necessarily predict or have enough vision or, you know, ability to see the system in order to determine what are going to be all the multiple impacts of that change that you introduced. So that's the perspective where I was coming from when I said you cannot actually design a complex adaptive system. It's way more complex, and it evolves in such ways that are beyond our ability to understand it.
And can you give me an example of one of those interventions?
Yeah, so for example, the example I was talking about with the way in which we recognize the work or how we performance review people, one typical change that I have been so lucky to introduce in an organization, and this is not something that any organization is open to doing, by the way, is we changed the performance review system so that we would actually make it coherent with the expectation that people needed to collaborate. So we stopped assessing the performance of one individual, and we started assessing the performance of the team they were part of and how they contributed to that team as determined by their peers. So it's a whole different notion of how we look at performance, and it's anchored in the idea that the system, we need to look at the whole. So, you know, lean again. So stop doing local sub-optimization, look at global optimization of the system. So that's one example that I can think of. There are a number, I mean, behavioral ones, establishing principles and values and making active campaigning and recognizing the behaviors that are aligning to those values or calling out the ones that are not. That's another intervention that will over time have an effect in the system. Good or bad, we don't know. Obviously, we hope that good, but you know.
So we have 4 more minutes, and we can take one last comment or question or thought. As we can see, this presentation it's making us think a lot. This is you know, and I think what stuck for me was that, you know, how we can have an impact on the systems so that people can be their best selves. I think that's what is sticking for me today. Anybody else?
I have a question. Can you share the presentation with us?
I can share, yes. Yes, Sheila, no worries. We'll share with Padma.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, somehow.
And I'll send it to you, Sheila.
Yeah, because even if we have another session on it,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very deep subject. And I think when you're talking about changing the system, you're talking about changing the organizational system. And that's, you got to worry about changing human nature and how we interact with each other. And people are very resistant to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Resistance to change is a whole topic, and yeah, we can certainly have another session because there are various things that you touched on with that statement, Sheila. For example, we changed the organizational system, and there are various dimensions of the organizational system that we need to look at. For example, the structures, the processes, the social aspects of how we come together and that interaction that you're talking about, the individual. So how do I grow myself in order to show up in a different way so that I can develop a different type of relationships? Because remember that the whole gist here is to actually deepen and shift the way in which we relate. That's actually the secret. It may feel completely contradictory to our notions of organizational life, but that's exactly what this is. Actually, when I'm coaching teams, and I use systems coaching for teams, I actually talk about love. And, you know, leaders also feel a bit sort of uncomfortable with the L word, but that's what this is about, really.
That
Yeah.
is true.
When you asked if people were supervising others, I'm not currently, but I certainly have in the past. I usually work as a program manager at some level or managing a department. So I've definitely had to do that. And I don't know how it is in Australia or New Zealand, but in the US, it's very complicated if you have employees and consultants, because you have to differentiate them, but I don't want to differentiate them any more than I absolutely have to. But for legal reasons, you have to. So it's really hard to build and maintain that cohesion. And when you talk about rewards, you're talking about the rewards for the employees, but the motivation for the consultants is different. But you've got to motivate all of them, and you've got to make them one team. You can't have them at odds with each other. You can't have, one time I had a consultant, I sent a couple of junior consultants to talk to someone senior, and I said, I know they know this, so they can explain it to you much better than I can. And they came back and said, he told us he had to learn it, so we have to learn it ourselves. I just went right over to him with them and said, I know that you're going to help these people learn it, because a lot of your value to us is all your knowledge that you share so willingly. From that point on, he shared very willingly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, those stories. I worked for a large consultancy firm, which was the reason for my my conversation, my opening. And all I can say is that you just have to push the boundaries. It's very simple. I mean, if you feel that the work that you do is the purpose in your life, or it's reflective of your purpose in life, then you just push the boundaries. I mean, that's the only way in which we can change our belief systems as humanity.
That is so true.
Yeah, but we have to change everybody's, not just our own. And we all have unconscious biases.
You don't change anyone but yourself, Sheila. That's another fact of life. So that's the only place where you can start.
One of the other things you've said, which is one of the reasons why I think there's a need for another session on the same topic.
So, Sofia, I'm hearing there's a need for another session. So, all right,
Yeah.
I think it is time. So, and you know, it's the future in Australia where Sofia is dialing in from. So yeah, she has the rest of her weekend has just begun. So yeah, we're very thankful to everybody who could make the time to join us this evening. And we have one more event tomorrow morning, which is the India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka Spiral, which is also a part of the Agile 20 Reflect Festival. And there are some exciting things happening in that spiral too. So please join us if you can. It's 7 a.m. US Eastern time. And you know, it's on the meetup. So feel free to grab the Zoom link from there. Sofia, I really want to thank you for you always present some very topics which make us think, you know, it invigorates me to kind of say, okay, what can I do? So thank you. I mean, you never cease to give us aha moments with everything that you have to share. So I truly appreciate, and Leah truly appreciates what you bring to us time after time. So
thank you, everyone. And probably next time we will stop thinking a little bit and start sensing a little bit more. So I promise I'll do my best to put together a session where we can explore things from a very different angle from today's.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. And I'll be in touch with you, Sofia. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, morning, day. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.